guests. I'm really honored to welcome you all to our premier event, Billion Dreams 2024. This is our fourth edition, and we're really honored to have such a panel of so many senior leaders. We are really happy that you all joined us today, and we are looking forward to this insightful and session today. And we are really happy to kind of have Mr. Maheshwari moderating this session for us. I would like to introduce him. I mean, most of you know, but I would just like to give a small introduction. With over 20 years of experience across IT, telecom, cybersecurity, and more, Deepak brings an incredible depth of knowledge from leadership roles at industry giants such as Symantec, Mastercard, and Microsoft. His vast expertise in public policy and advocacy spanning India, ASEAN, and China has positioned him as a key figure in technology and socio-economic development. We are really honored to have you with us today, Mr. Deepak. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Shobha. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, late evening, wherever, depending on which part of the world or which time zone you all have joined. So welcome to this interesting session put together by GTX. Now, I remember growing up in my school time, we used to hear about the term brain drain, and very specifically those days the example used to be given of Dr. Hargobind Khurana, which many people of my age and others might recall. And he had already been awarded a Nobel Prize, and one of the things was that he could not pursue his research in India, and then he had to migrate to US, and that's where he pursued that research further on, and he did receive the Nobel Prize those days in the late 60s. Now, cut back to 50 years later. What is the situation now? So today we have a situation that India is a thriving land of startups, thriving land of innovation, and a lot of people, not just Indians who have gone abroad and are coming back or want to come back, but also today I see there are a lot of places, for example, in Gurgaon, in Noida, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, etc., where you have a lot of expats. So they have, for example, just yesterday I met some people, and they are staying in a particular colony in Gurgaon, which is full of a lot of Koreans and Japanese families, not just individuals, families staying there. So is the case in Bangalore, so is the case in Mumbai and elsewhere also. So what is happening is that instead of having this whole thing about the concerns around brain drain earlier, I think now what we are talking about is a lot more. And then of course people did talk about a reverse brain drain. But today what we are talking in this era is about brain gain, and in terms of having these collaborative bridges where people, ideas, capital, everything is sort of moving back and forth in a very fast manner, but also in a very productive manner, also in a manner where it is protected in terms of data information, etc. In fact, we were having some discussion from NASSCOM hosting that for past couple of days, and it goes on till tomorrow. And in that environment, it's important for us to look at the huge Indian diaspora, for them to also see the type of opportunities that are coming up in India, that are already existing in India, and what else they can contribute as well as gain in this whole environment. And for that, we have got this fantastic panel today that GTX has put together. So we got Sangeeta Gupta from NASSCOM. Sangeeta and I go back for almost 25 years. Anurag Awasthi from ISEA, Indian Semiconductor Electronics Association. Sanjay Sridhar from Indian Institute of Architecture. And we'll also have Professor S. Mohan, currently with Puducherry Technical University and earlier with the IIT Madras. So what we are seeing today is that there are a whole lot of people who are going abroad for higher studies, for jobs, for research, etc. And then at times they are coming full-time back to India, at times they are coming back and doing some setup here, something there. And it need not be only in the technology space. Of course, technology space is much talked about, but I would go even to the extent of something like Chai Point, which started by a Harvard professor and his students. And there's a chain of Chai Points in India. So there are a whole lot of opportunities in different ways and means, which is coming up here. So let me start this discussion with Sangeeta. So Sangeeta, I mean, today we keep hearing, in fact, Devjani just mentioned that 90% of the Fortune 500 companies have got their GCCs here. And as per the latest NASSCOM report, GCCs themselves might have a sort of a revenue of almost 100 billion by 2030. And I still remember the first McKinsey study of NASCOM. So that time the whole industry was $4 billion in 98. And the projection was that, okay, by 2008, we wanted to have 54 billion. And that itself looked very big figure those days. And look at where we are now, more than 200 billion. So over to Sangeeta, and I would just request all the panelists to sort of initially restrict their comments to about 5 minutes each. And I would also request all the audience to please, this is an opportunity for us to have an interactive discussion. So please share your comments, questions. Please try to be brief because we have got hundreds of you around, which is fantastic for us to see. But at the same time, it would also be useful if the questions are sort of sharp and short so that we can pick up some of those questions later on in this session. Thank you. Over to Sangeeta.
Thank you so much, Deepak, and thank you, GTX, for hosting this session. I think really today India is at a very sweet spot where the domestic market or India's consumer market is growing very fast. I think we are the fastest growing economy with the 7% GDP around the world, despite all the global macroeconomic shifts are taking place. And clearly, I think for the opportunity to do something that is not just what was done a decade back, but to do it very differently is very high in India today. So I think if I just look back at the technology sector, and Deepak, you mentioned, right, that the first 2 decades was mostly about a cost efficiency play, where most companies would come to India for our talent. They will come for making sure, because India was more cost effective than their parent markets. They would come for the delivery excellence that India offered. And hence, I think we grew to be a very large sector based on these parameters. But what we've seen change over the last few years is the fact that how companies that are now coming to India are not just coming for cost and talent, they're also coming for the innovation imperative. So you talked about global capability centers, as we call them. They started as mostly, we used to call them captives at one time, which was basically saying, here is a global company, here is their captive in India, and they will only do what the parent tells them to do. I think that sector has really exploded in India. So it's, our latest data says there are 1,700 plus global captives, and these are across verticals. So banking, financial services, semiconductor, manufacturing, automotive, healthcare, every sector of the economy, you will see a global company having their GCC in India. And we call it GCC because we believe these are capability centers and not just cost efficiency centers. And I think the other big change we've seen is that today, there are global roles that are based in these centers. So people who have, worked, say, in an XYZ company in say, the US, are actually coming back to India and leading a global product portfolio from India. And that has really changed the nature of how global jobs are getting done out of India, which is a very, very big shift, because earlier it used to be I've had such a vast exposure, say if I'm working in the US and I come back to India, and my role would be very limited. I think today you have the blended experience of I can run the global role sitting out of India. I can see what's happening in the India innovation ecosystem, build for India, and combine that expertise and also take it back to my parent company. So just take financial services as an example, right? So there's a lot of growth of AI in financial services that's happening. On the other side, you have all the growth of fintech and UPI and ULI and other things that are happening in India. If you combine the two, I think the exposure from a learning, growth, product capability perspective is something that was never before seen in India. So I would just say that I think if people are thinking about coming back to India, it's a very different India. And you have to be, and I think there'll be people interested to come and see and explore these roles. And then while I'm talking of GCCs, there are roles in startups, there are roles in big services companies, there are roles in semiconductor companies. So you are seeing many sectors of India growing. And I think that's where we should be talking about more.
Thanks, Sangeeta. And by the way, roles also exist for people to just try their own entrepreneurship. That's one thing. Also, in terms of philanthropy, also there are roles. For example, I've seen some people who have come back from abroad and even joined the government as consultant or something like that.
Or in academia, right? I mean, even in academia, there are people,
associations, think tanks, etc. So there's a whole lot of such opportunities do exist. So for software, let me turn a little bit towards the hardware, towards Anurag. So we have this India Semiconductor Mission with a massive commitment from government of India. Of course, I do know, and we do all reckon that some of the other governments are putting much more money. But the government of India is not just putting money; they are putting, I'll say, much more than money. It's also in terms of developing the whole ecosystem around this. So we could talk about some of those type of opportunities in terms of semiconductor mission, but also perhaps a little bit more broadly in terms of the electronic manufacturing, etc. For example, 12 years back, we had only 2 units in India used to make mobile phones. Today, we have got hundreds. And today, we are effectively the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones in the world. Over to you, Anurag.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. I will possibly, restrict my comments insofar as the India semiconductor mission is concerned, because it's a very lengthy topic. So I will not go into too many of details.
Sure. Okay.
And I will not bore people with too many technical jargons, because people tend to get very sleepy the moment you speak too much of tech and get into the nanometer paradigm and what have you. So I will not go there. So I will make it simple for people to understand, and also understand where India stands today. See, I will look at firstly the issues of the Indian story insofar as the semiconductor space is concerned. Why? Because for the last 40 years, there's been a lot of romanticism with computer science and IT in India. So somewhere down the line, the hardware industry took a little backseat, and this is not something which is very unaccounted for, because it is finally, at the end of the day, it is ROI. It's when there are Googles and Microsofts all over the place, then you would not look at hardware. But now, post pandemic, when this crisis began all over the world and people realized that this is the new oil, and unfortunately no particular entity owns the entire end-to-end of this major substance, from safety blades to space shuttles, things have changed drastically. In came the India Semiconductor Mission, which realized that it is now time to get into Atmanirbharta insofar as the semiconductors is concerned. Now, what are the biggest assets of the country as you look at it? It is demand, because you are the third largest automotive market. You are the second largest user of internet in the world. You are the second largest startup ecosystem in the world, which looks at the entire, end-to-end chain of electronics, as well as the semiconductor manufacturing, design, so on and so forth. You are the design capital of the world. 22% of the designers in the world are here sitting in India. So I'm not going into the entire space of IP creation and all of that, but at the end of the day, most of the major multinationals in the world are making your design here. So there's a huge amount of impetus on the fabless infrastructure insofar as this country is concerned. Now couple this up with 1.5 million engineers coming out every year. You will be the talent powerhouse to the world. Out of those 1.5 million engineers, lo and behold, 40% of enrollments in STEM education in India are women. It is staggering. And now when you look at all of this, you look at the demand. Now demand is a function, we all know in economics, that you keep talking about demand and supply and what have you, but then at the end of the day, demand is directly proportional to aspirations. Now, how are we talking about aspirations? You look at the demographic dividend this country has. 28 years is the median age. So at 28 years, when I was 28, I wanted the swankiest car, I wanted the swankiest watch, I wanted the best mobile phone in the world. That creates demand. So when you look at this demographic dividend, which India has or is endowed with till 2040, and then you compare it to countries like China or what have you, or anywhere else today, even in the West, I think you take the cake till 2040. Now, coming down to the India Semiconductor Mission, let's look at the corners of the India Semiconductor Mission. I will not go into too much of detail. A lot of people say, though this money is a little less, it's a great technology, it's critical technology, this, that, and the other. Well, it's in the last 2.5 years, it is proved that the government can sanction 5 big projects. A fab costs anything beyond or north of $6 to $7 billion, or maybe $10 billion, right? Now, when you're looking at the corners, and the OSATs or ATMPs, which have been clearly brought out by me, that they've been, and we all know that they've been sanctioned by the government of India. Work is in progress on breakneck speed. Then you look at the design. There is a design-linked incentive, which the government has taken care of. Then you look at the startups. Now, when you have the hardware startups, the biggest problem that the hardware startups face, which all of you, you've been in Microsoft, is the EDA tools. There are only a couple of companies which create EDA tools and make EDA tools to make the SoC. So the government has, in its astute policies, made sure that the EDA tools will be made available, the academic version or the commercial version in the DLI and the academic version in the Chips to Startup program, in the chip-in. Then you come down to the PhD part. There is a scheme called the Vishweshwaraya scheme. So when you look at it, all corners in terms of policy and in terms of various other metrics, in terms of manpower development, in terms of supply chain development, in terms of the fabs and OSAT, in terms of the design, in terms of various other ancillaries are all catered for. So now a lot of people also are naysayers. They say that, why is the government putting in so much money just to get the people back and all of that, and what will happen and that will happen and all of that. But tell me, anywhere in the world, where have these mammoth facilities, which have the largest carbon footprint, been made without public money? Anything in technology which is pervasive and has a very, very high scope of failure, public money has to come in. So a lot of people would, argue, what about TSMC? To just put the record straight, TSMC was government owned. Till as late as 2011, the government of Taiwan held 71% stake in TSMC. So that is how it is. So India's story, insofar as semiconductors is concerned, has the prowess of providing the talent manpower to the world. B, getting the design absolutely into place. C, creating components in the value chain. And D, plugging into the global value chains. So with that, I think the entire story of the Indian ecosystem today on semiconductors is just the rubber which has hit the runway. I mean, you can see the flight very soon. I think I have finished my mandatory 5 minutes.
Thanks, Anurag. So, as you mentioned in terms of, let's say, rubber hitting the road, so let me move over to Sanjay. Now, you have been working a lot in terms of the cities, climate change, sustainability, etc. in that space. So, on one hand, yes, we do have this 2070 as our net zero target. We also are talking about, earlier we had this mission of 100 smart cities in the country. And just a few weeks back, the government has announced 12 specific industrial clusters, which will be sort of greenfield establishments where you will have industry focus, maybe particular industries, and then of course all the infrastructure that takes, including housing, everything around it. And then at the same time, we are also talking about other type of challenges. For example, with a population of almost 1.45 billion already and growing further on, at least for the next one and a half to 2 decades before we start sort of plateauing and then coming down a little bit. There's also a stark and strong demand on the resources side. So whether it's the water, whether it's energy, whether it's about the road infrastructure, etc. So how do you think that India is sort of providing this roadmap in terms of sustainable, livable livelihoods and lives going forward, so that people who are enjoying or who have become adept to a particular type of lifestyle elsewhere, perhaps in the world, even if they might have grown up in India, when they come back, how do they sort of look at this type of infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure, but also social and let's say social infrastructure, also in terms of environment, everything going forward? Over to you, Sanjay. I think you're muted. No, we still don't hear you. No, we don't hear. Can others hear, Sanjay?
No.
No, none of us can hear you. Not yet. So sometimes the technology can be a little challenging, but that happens all over the world, by the way. And it's not because of the, not yet. Sanjay, maybe what you can do is if you sort of disconnect and reconnect back, perhaps that might, because I remember I used to work in a company where most of the time you just restart and it would start working fine. Yeah, okay, all right. So while Sanjay sort of reconnecting, I just want to mention a couple of other things. One is in India currently we have some very interesting things which are happening. So of course a lot of people might have heard about this whole thing about digital public infrastructure, but let me just give you one small example. So today in India you can pay for an auto rickshaw ride, or for that matter even an e-rickshaw ride for something like 10 rupees. You could do something like that, and you could still pay by using your QR code or something like that, just in a jiffy. It happens instantaneously. And last month, we just crossed only 100 billion transactions in a month, which, by the way, was almost 40% plus of the global real-time digital transactions all over the world in terms of the number of volume of transactions we see. So, and this is using a stack which was launched not even a decade back. So it is less than a decade, and that's the growth we have already seen. And this is despite the fact that almost 400 to 500 million Indians are yet to have smartphones. So as and when they also are on that bandwagon, they are also connected with that type of digital infrastructure. Just look at the type of possibilities that exist. And interestingly, this is not something. So I used to work in a company called MasterCard. Now you could use a MasterCard sort of card, but only at a POS terminal that would have a MasterCard logo or something like that. But here it's not like that. You could make a UPI transaction. So you may be having company A's wallet or something like that, and the merchant has something else, maybe company B, and still it works immediately. So that's not a problem. Welcome back, Sanjay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, and over to you.
Thank you again. I don't know what was wrong with the technology, but thank you for having me here, and thank you for GTX for bringing this panel together. Well, I work in a fairly different field compared to our moderator and my fellow panelists. One of the things so my qualification is in architecture. I've done my master's from the Netherlands, a second master's from the US in urban affairs and public policy, which is basically focusing on urban governance and how cities are run, services are administered. And of course, now with the global focus on climate change and sustainability, that has been my work over the last over 2 decades now, roughly 20 years of work. I used to live in the US from 1998 to 2008. So some of the questions that Deepak, you talked about were top of my mind when I moved back. But for me, it was a bit easier because my father, who's no more, he was in the US from 1955 to 66. At a very stark time, because India and the US were the haves and the have-nots, right? That line has blurred a lot now. In fact, everything in the US you can find in India now, if you are able to come in at a certain level. So this is specifically to the question that we are talking about, as to what are the opportunities for professionals to come back if they've studied outside India. It could be in the European Union, could be in Australia, could be in the United States, with a specific focus on climate change and sustainability. I'll start by saying that all climate change is local. Even though climate change is a global phenomena that's happening, it is as local as it can be, because the risks associated with climate change are felt locally, even within a nation, within a state, within a city. the different scales of impacts. So one part of the city could be flooded, the other part is not. One part of the state is affected by drought, the other part is not. Some regions in a country are affected while other regions are not. And that's where the complexity of climate change becomes that much more important to address. Just going back to the point that we are talking about on this panel, I think there is a tremendous potential for professionals in the area of environmental sciences, architecture, urban planning, climate change, sustainability, climate finance, which is becoming a huge, big area now, because one of the big pushes from Government of India is the 2070 commitment, which is by 2070 we'll be carbon neutral as a nation. But what does carbon neutrality really mean in terms of our lifestyle choices? Well, carbon neutrality by 2070 really means that all transport systems in India would have moved to non-fossil fuel-based energy sources. Every single household in India would have moved to segregating their waste. That's what carbon neutrality means. And all the energy that we use in our houses are predominantly from renewable sources. Could be solar, wind, hydro, whatever technology exists in the next 50 years that's coming. But a big focus, I've seen a big focus and a big change in focus in the last 10 years. That's when the Smart Cities mission kicked in 2014, 2015. Where the Government of India put together a first of its kind, where they did a smart cities competition. I was involved in fact, I used to work with Bloomberg Philanthropy at that time when I had just come back in 2008 with the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which is the largest network of the 98 biggest cities of the world, all coming together and talking about challenges that they're facing. And one of the things that really came out of that is the tier 2, tier 3 cities are far more capable of managing their challenges than tier 1 cities. And that's simply because of the size of the cities. So Sangli or a Nagpur is much more capable of managing their problems than Mumbai or Pune, right? A Mysore is much better than managing their problems than Bangalore. Similarly, I can give various examples. And if you see in the Smart Cities competition, the first round of cities that won, all the top 5 cities were tier 2 cities. None of the tier 1 cities made it into the qualifying round in terms of being the top 5. So I will say this, that over the last 10 years, we've also seen a lot of Indian philanthropic money going into solving India's challenges. Earlier, a lot of the philanthropic money used to come from outside: Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, HP Foundation, Climate Works. So these are some examples that I'm giving from the philanthropic kind of perspective. But now you've seen, given that India is progressing at such a pace that there are high net worth individuals who want to contribute to their own country because it impacts their own businesses. Because these are business owners who are impacted when a city floods. These are business owners who are impacted if their employees fall sick due to bad air quality. Right? So we are seeing more and more examples of high net worth individuals like Mr. Mahindra, Mr. Jamshed Godrej, and the likes, who are coming together to form, for example, the India Climate Collaborative. The ICC, which is based out of India, based out of Mumbai, is the first Indian philanthropy for India by Indians. Typically, that always money used to come from the outside. And I'll end this by my 2-3 minutes by saying that even though India is the third largest polluter in terms of emissions, our per capita emissions are less. Just the sheer size of our population. And being an aspirational country, I do believe that the next decade and a half is India's decade. And India needs every single brain that we can tap into to solve these problems, because we need people with global exposure but have a hands-on understanding of local challenges. Because what we have seen, especially in the climate action space, just global best practices implemented in India without understanding the contextual challenges simply do not scale. They'll achieve a certain level of success and then it doesn't go anywhere. So let me stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay. So what we are seeing, you said, is that while text, let's say the global text of the global practices may matter, but the context also matters quite a lot. So let's move now in the next round a little bit beyond, let's say, Delhi-centric central government side to a little bit more on the states and the role of the local cities administrations. So of course, Sanjay did touch a little bit upon that. So Sangeeta, when you're looking at from that perspective, the role of state governments, how they are sort of attracting people, investment, creating that type of infrastructure. I mean, 97, yes, we had the first IT policy from the state of Andhra Pradesh, even before the central government could have an IT policy for that matter. Even the state IT department actually started from Hyderabad in that sense. But so what are the things that you're seeing specifically in terms of opportunities at the state level? Because for a lot of people, it's much more relatable if they look at a particular state rather than the whole country, or let's say whether the state where they have worked or their family is, or they've got some other relationships, etc. So what is the type of thing that we are seeing in the state at the states level? And that's something that I would request all of you to sort of reflect after Sangeeta, Anurag, Sanjay also, in terms of, apart from whatever the central government is doing, what type of things that states are doing. And obviously people may come back to India to solve some problems, but also they would also like to sort of gain something out of this whole thing. So I remember today we are talking about RTI, and 20 years back we used to hear about RTI as a right to information. Today we are talking about RTI as a return to India. So let me move over to Sangeeta and then to Anurag and Sanjay.
Great question, Deepak. So clearly, states have a very, very important role to play, and it's been a role, like you said, right from what Mr. Chandrababu Naidu did or S.M. Krishna did in Karnataka, and the healthy competition between states to say, how do I attract more investment into my state? I think that is now broad-based to saying, yes, in each of these states, while there is one major town, what can I do to the next level of towns? We're also seeing the next level of states come up. So Madhya Pradesh is very aggressive. Odisha is very aggressive. You're seeing, so I'm getting an echo, but I don't know if it's for everybody. Okay. So you're seeing also the next level of states coming up, which are very, very aggressively saying, you come, you've set up in 3-4 cities in India, the next center can be in Madhya Pradesh. Post-COVID, we also saw a lot of our employees return to their hometowns. So the kind of talent that you can get now in the next level of cities in India is very different. The quality of infrastructure in the cities has improved, the social infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure. And I think that is a lot to do with the states and how they are promoting it. I think the other big factor I see differently now is that states are also increasingly saying, how can I use better technology for improving my citizen connect? So, they will have programs like AI-enabled pension for senior citizens or, agriculture farming. How can I support that? So I think they're not just about investment and attracting. They are saying, one, how can I help you work better with the academia in my state? How can I implement technology or AI for better citizen governance? And of course, become as much as a user of technology from a state perspective and bring, of course, new companies to the state. So I think the central state relationships may be what they are, but we see a lot of interest from different state governments and the incentives they're willing to provide, the need to change their policies, the openness that they have to just say, tell us what you need to do and we can help make that happen. Of course, the process may take time, but I think there is a lot of openness for change right now.
Thanks, Sangeeta. So same thing now to Anurag.
All right, Mr. Maheshwari, Sangeeta's brought out some very relevant points. So, let me start with one very simple thing. I wonder, why are we calling these places tier 2 and tier 3 cities? I think my whole idea is that you are creating a problem when there is none. right? When Dhirubhai Ambani goes to Jamnagar and creates the biggest oil refinery in the world, or Jamshedji Tata goes and establishes Tata Nagar, how can you call them tier 2 and tier 3? I mean, the entire concept of this tier 2 and tier 3 is lopsided. It's a city, it's a big city or a small city, it's your city. So I have a little issue with this lexicon which is being used very, very vehemently in India, tier 2 and tier 3. Somehow I can't relate to that. That is one to start with, but that's a very personal view. I articulate in a lot of public forums the same way. I influence a lot of people to tell them, please don't call them tier 2 and tier 3. They're small cities and big cities. It is a revenge of geography. You can't do much about it. So that is to start with. Now, the second thing what Sangeeta brought out, the center-state relations. Now let's look at these policies. Now, since I represent the semiconductors and the critical electronics space in India, you look at the central policies and you look at how the states are stacking on their policies on the central policy. It was unheard of so many years ago. So there was this great joke, because I spent a majority of my time and life in the government for nearly 27 years. So there was this great joke that Satyamev Jayate has those 4 lines, they all look in 4 different directions, right? But now you look at the way the things have changed in the last 14, 15 years, especially the last around 7, 8 years, especially. When you look at the center-state relations of what Sangeeta just mentioned, just see how these states are stacking their policies onto the central policy. They are something, which would be akin to what I call a competitive federalism. They are competing. Somebody says that I will give you a sop of land at so-and-so, so-and-so. Somebody says, I'll waive off your stamp duty. Somebody says, I'll give you a, electricity tariff for setting up a facility for $2. Somebody says, no, I'll give it to you for 150. Somebody says, I will make sure that, your local workforce is trained as part of my policy. Somebody says, I will train it. So when you start looking at so many, things, you are basically fostering competition. And this leads to a tremendous amount of innovation. And you multiply the same thing with the number of people you have and the resource pool you have, you are bound to be a superpower. There's no, it's a no-brainer actually. So when I see and I interact with so many states, their hierarchy today, whether it is, the bureaucracy, whether it is the polity, whether it is anybody else, or the policy makers, or the industry, or even the academia, everybody wants to now compete. So this in itself is one of the biggest, harbingers of Amrit Kaal in India. So anybody who wants to come in, he can pick and choose what he wants to do. He's got a bouquet lined up in front of him. That would I want to go to Odisha, or would I want to go to Gujarat, or Andhra Pradesh is suitable for me, or Telangana policies are good or not good, and so on and so forth. Now, along with that, now this is not rhetoric. Now you just see how you've cemented all of that. You say that I have got Gati Shakti going. I have a national logistics policy which is documented. I have freight corridors running from place A to place B. I built the largest amount of network of roads in the world. My airports have if not doubled then tripled in the last around 10-12 years. Whether I'm giving a lot of impetus to the chemical industry, and suddenly the Indian story, which rested on the premise of agricultural economy and service economy, leaving the manufacturing economy behind, suddenly manufacturing has taken center stage. So all in all, when you look at it from a very, very competitive point of view, this is the place to be in. So I think that should be enough to possibly sum it up as to how we go from here. Thanks very much for this.
Thanks, Anurag. So Sanjay, when we are looking at all this type of additional infrastructure, for example, many years back, we used to have just 4 international airports in the country, the 4 old metros, Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai, that's it. Today we've got a whole lot of international airports, even from smaller places. Okay, and not just international airports, we've got a whole lot of other type of infrastructure also, which is coming up not just within the cities, but also across the cities and other countries, etc. So what is it that you are sort of looking at in terms of both opportunities as well as challenges? Because, for example, some people say that traffic jams are good because that shows that a whole lot of people do want to sort of move around, and at the same time, of course, there are other type of infrastructure projects also which are coming up, like metro and many others. And please be brief, and then we've already started getting a few questions, so we'll move over to the Q&A now after your comments.
All right, thank you. So let me start with with just a response to Anurag's comment on how do we call our smaller and smallest of cities. I mean, the nomenclature was basically used from the census data, because when the census surveys are conducted, that's the nomenclature, and that's also the government language, having now working with governments for the last 20 years or so. But your point is well taken. So let me start with the challenges. In spite of everything that India is doing has done in the last 7 to 10 years, and what we expect to build in the next 20 to 25 years, let me put some things in perspective. India currently, as per government data, it says that India is 32% urban. That means we have about 400 or 500 million people living in cities. The biggest, the medium-sized cities, and the smallest cities, and then municipal towns, and then it becomes villages. Right? India expects to be 50% urban by 2050. And what that 50% urban means, that we will add another 500 million people to be living in cities in the next, say, 25 years, right? 2024 by 2050. Right? But what does that 500 million people mean? It will mean that we're going to build additional 10 Mumbais across India. Either existing cities will become the size of Mumbai, or you will create cities like Mumbai who will merge, amalgamate, or start fresh. Right? But it means that the scale and the pace at which India is urbanizing, India needs to leapfrog some of our challenges. And when I mean leapfrog, I mean the fact that given the size of our country, given the diversity that we have in our country, and given the aspirations that we have from people in India, India cannot afford to make the same climate mistakes that other countries have made, and they are facing the consequences of it now. We need to be able to leapfrog those challenges, and that's where I will say this, that one of the surest way for India to do this is what I call problem solving. Because I believe over the last 10, 15 years, 20 years of my work, is the surest way to solve challenges in India is to increase the number of people who can solve the problems. We need more problem solvers, and that problem solving approach not necessarily is just the jugards that we do in India, but it has to be based on hardcore academic research. It has to come from global solutions applied locally and contextually, and it has to be able to bring the political economy with it, because unless you get political buy-in, none of these solutions will scale. So I'll end this by the question that was asked: what does one gain by returning to India? I think the question it's a hard one and an easy one to answer. In the sense, if I take my own example, after a certain point in one's career, you're surrounded by peers who roughly have the same level of experience, who have the same level of exposure. But where is the impact? When you bring those skills back to India, given the scale of challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead, you are at least 5 to 7 years ahead of everybody around you, and that's a huge impact. And of course, it goes without saying when you come back to India, you come back to your family. So you have your support structures and you have everything else that takes the load off you in terms of running your house and everything else. And I think there was a question on how far we are behind in terms of India's infrastructure. I think India is building now for the next 25 years. So there is opportunity and there's also challenges that we have to overcome. And I think that's one way of doing it, is to solve the number of problem solvers. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay. So when we're looking at this whole thing, I think two things are very clear. One is obviously we are adopting some global solutions to India, but at the same time there's a lot of opportunity also in terms of innovating within India and then taking those solutions outside India, not just in terms of the global south, which of course has been the traditional refrain, but also perhaps even to all over the world. So for example, CEO writes to the Fed that, okay, why can't we have something like UPI? That sort of shows an opportunity for us in that type of. So one of the questions that I would like all of you, and this time let me start with Anurag, and then because I understand that Anurag, you also have another commitment afterwards, is in terms of India should be sort of doing the top three things to get people look at India as an opportunity of coming. Two or three things in terms of the policy, what you see as a big thing that the country should be doing.
Okay. So if I get this correct, Mr. Maheshwari, you asked me what are the top three things as per me that India should be looking at to make it a global powerhouse in the next 5 to 10 years. Am I correct? I think we've lost him, but he's there. Yeah, he's there. Okay. So if I get the question very correctly, you asked me what are the three major things as per me which are important for India in the next 5 to 7 years, 10 years. We have changed the national education policy, which is one of the most path-breaking reforms. The only issue is a lot of people will say that it has to be implemented now. No, the education, I think all of you with so many years of experience and gravitas will understand it's a very cultural issue. So it can't change in a day because it transgresses culture. So it will take around 5-7 years for the national education policy to come into the picture. Now, once it comes into the picture, it possibly, as I feel, is that it will imbibe something called a culture of innovation. Somewhere down the line, we have a prowess of producing a lot of Satya Nadellas and Sundar Pichais, but we fall short of producing Elon Musks and Bill Gates. So that culture of innovation will give rise to a lot of innovation. So the moment that happens, a lot of things will fall into place, and the trajectory is quite well set. As I can see it, I'm that eternal optimist. So I feel that the trajectory is good to go. That is number one. Number two, a lot of people in any structure, whether it is in the service sector or manufacturing sector or in the agriculture sector, somewhere down the line, we have not been able to harness the power of R&D. While a lot of people may say that R&D is a function of cerebral aptitude, and we are a great race, and we are very intelligent people, and we do this and that, and look at the brain drain and all of that. But the problem is that as per me, R&D is not a cerebral function. It is a function of money. It's simple. The more money you put in, the more times you have the capability of failing, and the more times you will innovate. So somewhere down the line, this second part of R&D needs to be plugged. Again, when you look at the entire structure, you have the National Research Fund which is coming. There's a new national research policy which has been launched. So people have taken note of these issues. But these are two very, very important aspects. The third part, and the most important part, in tech space. No matter how much you innovate, no matter how much you manufacture, no matter how much you export, no matter how big a global behemoth you become in whatever you're wanting to do in tech space, till such time the IPR does not lie with you, there is a major problem. So this entire concept of the IPR in India has to take center stage now. So if I were to look at 3-4 important aspects, of course, infrastructure, I will not say about, things like HR development and all of that. That comes with all of that. But these three things: R&D, the innovative culture and the culture of innovation by virtue of the new national education policy, the IPR, and plugging into the global supply chains by energizing more industries like the chemical industry. I mean, chemical industry is the 6th largest in the world, 8% to your GDP in this country, statistically. And imagine if you energize it further, what can it do? And all of that, because everybody requires all of this. So when we look at all of this, there are people all over the world today who are of Indian diaspora, whether they are of big multinationals, whether they are of the, the global behemoths of semiconductor and electronics companies, the Indian diaspora is all over. It is time for them now to come and contribute to the Indian growth story also. And I think with that, I rest my case.
That if the NRIs come back here, so should they be looking just as new opportunities, or they just bring their existing skills, let's say the technical skills, and do something with those skills in India?
Both. I would say both. They're coming back to India along.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. No, continue. Anurag was answering it. We let him complete.
Can we also get Sangeeta's views on?
No. Sangeeta, all yours.
Yeah, no.
I thought the question was to me, but I would say both.
Yeah, I would also say the same thing. I think it's both, and it's very individual centric on, do you want to do more in your area of specialization, or do you want to do, contribute to something that's totally new? But I think both these opportunities exist in India. So I would say choose and make that investment to say, where do you want to come? But I think given the size and, scope in India, as you've heard from all the panelists today, there's a lot to be done, and we have our challenges can be our biggest opportunities, right? So,
Sanjay, if you have to sort of look at what are the 2 or 3 things that the government should be doing, what would you sort of suggest, whether in terms of mass transit or let's say urbanization, because as it is of course by 47 more than any urbanized, whether institute through migration. And we also have this whole thing about a lot of people coming back to India, and some people it might be a little challenge in terms of getting same effort in India, might not, or you may believe that, whether it's in terms of healthcare or education for children, etc. So what's your comment on that?
Yeah, so let me first answer the first part of your question. I think the government has done a fantastic job in positioning India on the global economy map. Number one, it has also leveraged as Anurag mentioned, it's also leveraged the youth of the country who are now prepping to take on the mantle of growing the economy. But I think what is really a big focus that is needed is, I think the government does not have their eye on the cross-connecting nature of climate impact. Because climate impact is across sectors, across scales of demography, and across the country, given the fact that it impacts agriculture, it impacts investment, it impacts water, it impacts air, it impacts transportation. Therefore, I think where the government really needs to get their focus spot on is to move away from a kind of siloed approach of looking at environment only from the environment lens. Because what we're seeing now in some cities, and especially in Bangalore, is we're seeing a lot of climate tech startups coming up. They're really using technology to address some of the climate challenges that cities like Bangalore and cities around the country are facing. So I think that's something that's really, really important. Now, to answer your question on what can one expect coming back to India, I'll share something that my late father shared with me when I broke the news to him that I was coming back, and I'm going back to 2008. He said three things. He said, "Son, whether you decide to come back or not is your decision, and you and your family have to decide. But if you come back with no strings attached. Means be completely committed to being in India and making sure that your work is impactful. So be committed there." Second thing he said is America, India is India. Do not compare the two countries. America has its advantages and challenges, so does India. So be well aware, because if you start to compare, you will never be happy wherever you are. And the third thing he said, when you come back, bring the discipline and the rigor of working in a global West to bring back to India, because that really helps the country move forward.
I think Deepak's network seems to be frozen.
I think these were a couple of questions that we highlighted. I think they can you hear us, Mr. Maheshwari?
No, I think he's frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen. He was actually going a bit low on his battery.
Could you read the questions, Shobha? That will be helpful.
Okay, sure. I will. If you can just take this question, please.
So, I think India's population or India's demographic is its biggest strength. I think there's no doubt about it. But I think it's a strength we have to mine. I think to the point you heard saying we need to become a country of problem solvers. We need to build not just technology skills or XYZ skills. I think we need to be very strong in core skills of creative problem solving, experiential learning. So I think the way we thought of skilling in the past, India needs to change that. And I think that is going to be very, very critical for India, because our demographic has to be our biggest strength and not our greatest weakness. So I would just say that.
Mr. Avasthi or Mr. Sanjay, would you like to address this question? Anything added to this?
I would, Shobha, say very, simply that you can be quantitative, but at the same time, you need to be qualitative. And that's about it. The best part is that this country is the greatest country in the world. Because if you go back and you see the previous media reports in the last around 10 days, and you see there are a couple of nursery schools in a country which envisaged a one-side child policy or what have you for a very long time, turning into old age homes, because the population or the demography the aging has been very, very paradoxical. There are countries which are increasing retirement ages. Here you are with one of the best capabilities that the world has to offer today, the demographic dividend, till 2040. If this can't be utilized for this country's greatness, with qualitativeness along with quantitativeness, then I think we need to lose the plot. So from my side, this quantitative analysis of this population becoming a strength in the near future is not only a dynamic, it is a reality. Now, how you utilize it, in what manner you utilize it, by utilizing the best practices, by channelizing it into various skill sets, by creating jobs, by creating more options, by embracing more areas of technology, by embracing more structures and corridors of various different subsets of skill development. I think that's a challenge, and I think this government is doing a fabulous job insofar as all this is concerned. And I will be very, very happy to see, if somebody has put a benchmarking of 2047 for this country to become Viksit Bharat, I think it's a doable task. So I'm quite clear about that. And the main driver of this will be this population, which will be your strength.
Thank you for your insights. You would like to add something, and maybe we can wrap up after that.
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah, Mr. Sanjay. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I agree with both my fellow panelists that India's strength is its population, but it as Anurag rightly said and so eloquently kind of characterized it, we need to leverage it. We need to leverage it in a manner that taps into the skill sets available, the demographic distribution of those skill sets across the country, not in just pockets of certain states. For example, Bangalore as a city constitutes 1/3 of the state's population, but 60% of the state's GDP. Right? There is a disconnect because everything seems to concentrate around Bangalore, and I think while the national governments have done, while the national government has put its kind of money behind key focus areas, I think the real need is to get state governments, as Anurag said earlier in this discussion, they're kind of stacking their resources behind national missions and national priorities. So I think there is a really good chance that if we do this right, there is no reason in the world why we can't be the greatest country going forward for the next 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years.
Sure. We have Mr. Deepak Maheshwari joining us back. Thank you, and I guess we can take one last question since he has joined us.
Sure, Shobha. So, yeah, so maybe you can just sort of mention the question, and after that we'll wrap it up. Yeah. Shobha?
So it's semicon investment is great. Where else do you feel the government is investing? Where should they invest in the years ahead? Is the question coming from Sonia. Can we have an answer to that, please?
So maybe Sangeeta, can you sort of look at this?
That was a mute. No, I can give a tech perspective, but I think the question is much broader. I would just say that, in India in the past, we had a very short-term view on investing, right? So we would say 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and we would always be playing catch-up. With the whole vision of Viksit Bharat and India 2047, I think there have been 10 or 12 specific areas that have been outlined, right from agriculture to healthcare to climate to water, right? And I think there is a roadmap that we have to think through in each of these areas. How do we make these sectors truly world-class, right? So it's not so much about I need to do quantum or I need to do biotechnology. Yes, you will need to do all of that. But I think how do we make sure that financial services or fintech in India today is a world leader? So how do you make sure which are the key sectors in India that can be truly world-class and make the right investment in it, whether it's technology, whether it's people, whether it's industries? I think that to me would be how we should be thinking about this, not so much from which is the after semicon, what's the next big thing, right? So
thanks, Sangeeta. And with that, we would have to sort of close this interesting discussion. But all that I would like to say to the audience is this, that this was just a brief trailer of some of the things that you can may and would see. But this is a picture अभी बाकी है मेरे दोस्तों. So I would say that in this type of thing, it's not just that you need to be a passive watcher or a passive audience of watching a movie. This is something where you also have to sort of act, contribute, direct, and also be participate in that and also shape this whole journey, as Sangeeta just mentioned. So it's about the interconnecting different type of streams. So we are talking about policies, we are also talking about people, we are also talking about the processes, and obviously we are talking about the prosperity for India as well as for the whole world. And with that note, thanks a lot to all my fellow panelists, to the organizers, but last but not the least, to all the audience from all over the world, from wherever you have joined. So have a good evening, good day, good afternoon, wherever, in whichever part of the world you are. And GTX as a platform will continue to pursue this whole stream through other sessions as well as other programs and initiatives. And obviously, all of us are also available through different channels, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any suggestions, queries, questions, etc. So with that, I would just like to thank again everyone for joining today, and I hope that you all also found this whole session as useful as all of us did. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was indeed lovely having all of you, share your valuable insights. And there's really lot happening from each of these areas that you kind of mentioned. But the key takeaways for me, of course, were something that Anurag mentioned. Three lovely takeaways: the culture of innovation, leveraging the R&D and the investment that's happening in R&D, and of course the IPR. And of course the youth, has to be leveraged. I mean, these are key takeaways for me, and there are a lot more other questions that we've received, which we'll probably share with you, and in your free time, if you can just kind of respond back to them, we'd like to kind of give back to the audience as well. Thank you indeed, Sangeeta, Anurag, Sanjay, and Deepak for being here on the session today.
So maybe what you could do is you could sort of put some of those questions as FAQs and put them on your website so that these are visible to everybody, irrespective of whoever asked those questions. And because some of those questions might be very generic and might be in the minds of many people. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.